Okay. So yesterday we talked about our case control design a bit and how we're measuring this exposure odds ratio and using multivariate regression, which Nulupa talked about yesterday as well. One of the things that's nice about case control studies is that you can actually do them quickly and efficiently if needed. So if there is some issue coming up where you want to, you're seeing cases of a disease that are unexpected, or when you've learned about a potential new exposure, you, depending on where you are and what the disease or outcome is, you can often assemble a case control study a little bit more quickly. And because you don't have to wait over a period of time, like in a cohort, to collect all of your data, you can actually assess this outcome and exposure at the same time, even though it's a case control study, right? So you can find the people with the disease and without the disease, you can recruit them, and you can collect your data about exposure really at the same time if you need to. So sometimes they can be an efficient way to answer very specific questions about an exposure-disease relationship. And also, again, multiple exposures and rare outcomes. It makes a really good contribution to the evidence in the literature, and again, has good internal validity. So we talking about kind of this classic case control study in lung cancer and smoking. I won't go through all of the math on the board, but this is, so if we're looking at patients with lung cancer and control patients, what do you notice here about smoking and lung cancer?
Who has smoking more likely time 9.1 times when we compare who did not have 9 times got lung more likely lung cancer more than who had.
Is it 9 times more likely to have lung cancer, or is it among those with lung cancer?
Yeah, among. Yes.
Yeah. So just remember when we're describing that. So yes, the odds of smoking in lung cancer patients were 9.1 times greater than the odds of smoking in control patients. Yes, who didn't have lung cancer, right? So what you're talking about is the odds of smoking among the cases versus the controls, right? So people still smoked in the control patients, right? There were still a lot of smokers. This is from the 1960s. So when it was very normal to smoke. So if you see that whole top row is cigarette smokers, way more people smoked and then didn't smoke. But not everyone who smokes develops lung cancer. It's just that the odds of being a smoker among lung cancer patients is much higher, right? So it doesn't mean that if you smoke, you're 9 times more likely to get lung cancer. It means if you have lung cancer, you're 9 times greater odds of being a smoker. Okay. And remember, it's the greater odds and not the more likely to. Yes. This was I think 1952. Sorry, this was the original study linking cigarette smoking and lung cancer. was a case control study published in the British Medical Journal in 1952. So yeah, only 68 patients in this entire study didn't smoke. So lots of smokers. But among the people who have lung cancer, the odds of smoking were much higher. Okay, so this is just a reference slide that when you're looking at your, you determine risk in a cohort study across the rows like this, right? And then in a case control study, you're starting with your diseased and not diseased and going down. I thought I had another little slide there. I think there's one in the next section too. So in cohort studies, we're looking at disease, the occurrence of disease, the risk of disease across exposure groups, right? That's why there's this, that doesn't show up. That's why there's the arrow this way, because you're looking, what is the risk of disease among this exposed versus the not exposed? But can you talk about risk of disease if you already have the disease? Which of these studies do we already have the disease?
Yes.
Someone from this side of the building.
Yes.
So do we start with people who have the disease in cohort or case control? Yes, in case control, right. So if we already have the disease, can we determine the risk for the disease? No.
Yes.
No, that's the answer. The answer is no. So if this is why we can't look at risk in a case control study, we look at odds of the exposure among the people who have the disease and don't, because they already have the disease. So we're not looking at the probability of developing it like we do in cohort studies. Because in cohort studies, we're starting with
disease.
right. Everyone in a cohort study at the beginning of the study does not have the disease. Right? So you're watching people over time and seeing what is the risk? Are they going to develop the disease? And when they do, what's the risk of developing the disease by exposure group? Okay. We'll keep talking about this and doing some examples, because it's I think when this part where you're thinking about, okay, if I'm starting with people who have the disease, there can't be a risk for developing it. They already have it. So what we're looking for is the exposure. What are the odds that you have the exposure? But if we're starting with a bunch of people who don't have a disease, then we're interested in seeing who develops it. And we're looking at that risk for developing it by the exposure categories. So if we want to do a study tomorrow. We will start thinking about a study. And what we're noticing is that there are a lot of people who have, trying to think of a good disease. Give me an example of a disease. What is it?
You would like to say the LANI disease? Maybe all the field is right, but if when the patient have diabetes, maybe they have to got the malnutrition like a disease is right. It's difficult to find.
What is it called?
Malnutrition.
What, mellitus? Diabetes mellitus? No.
Infection disease with diabetes, the severe dengue.
Oh,
Who develop the severe dengue?
severe dengue.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start there and say, we have people who develop severe dengue. And those are what? We're starting with people. We've got a room full of people who had severe dengue. Then, what is happening? Just knowing that much, we have a room full of people with this disease, severe dengue. Which study design do you think we might?
Can we do?
Because
we would like to see who got the severe, why they are involved to the severe disease, risk factor of the severe disease.
So you're looking for the exposure, but you should have some exposure in mind. What is your research question? What do you think might be?
Maybe I use three million bill to look in for the who got the severe. For example, maybe the travel or is far from hospital or something like that. And from the patient themselves, because of money, because of the travel, because of
Okay.
And secondly is maybe from the facility, because the transfer or something like that. For the diagnosis, they are delayed for diagnosis.
Okay, so they may have had a delay. All right, so let's go with one of those to start with. How about the distance from a hospital? I think that could be a good place to start. So, and what about distance from hospital is different than certain measuring distance from hospital versus measuring socio-demographic, other socioeconomic factors, or some of the other factors that you mentioned. What's different about distance from the hospital?
Because especially in the district hospital, because mostly in Laos, the mountainous area. So maybe they get sick or just more people just might be related, they didn't go to the hospital.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I understand its importance and the role that it plays in potentially leading to severe dengue. But distance a person lives from the hospital is measurable and can be objective, right? You can ask the person how far they live from the hospital, but you can also get their address, location, where they live.
Yeah.
And you can measure that on a map. Now, you also have to think about, because this was something we did in Appalachian, Kentucky, which is also very mountainous. You can measure distance by a line, and it may be 2 miles, but by the roads you have to take, it could be 15 miles or kilometers. So you actually can measure the driving distance, and there are ways to do that. You can use even just Google Maps. You can ask them how they drove, right? There are different ways to do it, but it's more objective than some of the other potential factors that you might measure. You can measure those too, but this primary relationship between distance to the hospital and developing severe dengue, I think is a good is a good exposure outcome relationship to look at. So if we have, so what would how might you write that research question?
It's, there's the the rural area more like.
You don't even have to say rural area, because what is it you're actually measuring?
It's, Eastern,
Yes.
Eastern severe case or then the
Yes,
organization.
yes, so is distance from hospital, you could say distance of residence home from hospital associated with developing severe dengue? What would our statistical null hypothesis be? Just in words, you know, not. So if our hypothesis is our research question is distance associated with severe dengue, what's your hypothesis? Just descriptively, like what do you think is you're gonna see?
Living long distance. More severe dengue than with near other who live
The closer distance or,
reason
okay.
in hospital.
And if we're thinking this as a case control study, and with a case control study, we're looking at odds of the exposure among cases and controls, how might you restate your hypothesis with that in mind?
In this case, if we want to apply the 3D label bills, but maybe focusing on the distance, the delay, the two delay, right? Because the first delay is about the decision making, and the second delay is about the distance, and third delay is about the social development, social economic.
Yes,
Yeah.
great. That's a great point. And those are all factors that you could measure, thinking about where these different delays occur. But let's hold on to that and just think about the first primary relationship. Hold on. Thank you so much, Week. Great. So let's write first.
The distance of one of the distance.
Wait, say it.
Only distance from the hospital, right? In this case, we look the distance.
Distance from the hospital. Yeah.
The exposure is the distance, right?
Yes, the exposure is the distance. Yeah.
And the outcome is the severe.
So when we're doing case control, here, let me write some of this down first and then we'll. This is good. This is. So our outcome is severe dengue. Our exposure is distance, and we're assuming this is like increased distance, right? Distance, further distance from the hospital, but distance from hospital, we will decide. Yes, so we'll have to decide what is our exposure, how to measure our exposure. We'll have to make a decision. We don't have to do it right now, but about how far that distance is. And we want this to be, okay, so time.
Yeah, instead of the kilometer, because that the road condition is like comparable, the one of comparable for the distance that.
Yeah.
That's good, that's good, yeah.
Travel time to hospital?
Yeah.
Yes, that's great. So. Okay. And we'll return to measuring that in a minute. But, so our research question is distance from hospital, or now it's travel time. Yes, let's fix all of it. So it's the same, is travel time to hospital associated with developing severe dengue. Okay, and then it's our case control study. Go back here. That's not back. This is, wait. There we go. I'll keep this up here while we're talking through it. So our hypothesis in general is that greater travel time, more severe dengue, right? Like that's sort of the conceptually what the hypothesis is. But if we're talking about hypothesis in terms of our case control study, how might we state it? And I would recommend reflecting up here to say that we think the odds of severe dengue will be what? I'm sorry, the odds of having long travel time. Someone keep going with that.
We on the it's not the woman, yes.
You gotta keep going.
It's the on charlatan.
Charlatan.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Longer and then not severe.
Yeah, those, without, we haven't defined what the controls are yet, but those without severe. Who do you think you are gonna compare to? Are you gonna compare to people, just regular old healthy people, or people with dengue, or what?
My moderate that sometimes moderated, but for the dengue state, they might not. Can we compare with the mild? Because the symptom of the dengue in the first 3 days is maybe it's normal. But who got severe for like the fever is increased. When the fever is decreased, it's more have the severe more how we say more the severe period that we have to follow up. But most of the people that thought that when they decrease the temperature, maybe they stay good already, but it's most cases severe
Mhm.
when we in this building.
So who would be? So who do you want to have as your controls then? This is actually a tough question. It might break our study.
See, I think maybe discuss, like, we have for example, we have 4 type of dengue, and some type is it like they can recover by themselves, maybe it's not severe, like, maybe some have, yeah, like.
So there's like levels. And
and
so are there people who would go to the hospital but not get severe? Hmm. So the only people going to the hospital are the ones who have severe dengue?
No, actually, if they got fever, they go to the hospital, but if they, why is 3D delay model? The 3D delay model is many factors that
Yeah.
contribute to the develop to severe dengue. And I think for the distance, maybe is the one reason, because they're living far from the health facility.
Mhm.
They just take their pill or drink water.
So maybe in this case, it would almost be, maybe, like, the outcome might be death. And the cases are death and the controls are severe dengue, right? Because you need you kind of need all people who are going to go to the hospital to look at the travel time. It's assuming that a reduced travel time, if you have shorter travel time and you can get there, you have time to get better. But if it takes you a long time to get there and both people are waiting kind of the same amount of time to go, then you don't make it on time and you die. But I know there aren't that many deaths, right? So maybe this isn't the best study design for us, but we've done such a good job of starting to lay this out that maybe, maybe we need to do like a retrospective. Maybe everyone who comes to the hospital with dengue, period, you go back and look at you measure how sick they became with dengue, but then go back and find out what their travel time. It's kind of a retrospective.
The diagnosis, I mean, the delay for diagnosis. To be
Delayed diagnosis could
Yeah.
be the exposure or. Okay,
or who delay.
yeah. Yeah. Delayed diagnosis. And how would you define delayed diagnosis?
Because in dengue they have maybe like 5 to 7 symptoms. They're diagnosed kind of dengue fever.
Mhm.
It's less than this 5. For example, you have fever, you have headache, you have pain, you have stomach
Mhm.
or something.
Mhm. So when are you supposed to? But if you want to measure delayed diagnosis, you have to decide what that means exactly. So if they have these symptoms, but they wait longer to get a diagnosis, you have to decide maybe time in days or hours from onset of a certain number of symptoms, right? This is actually really good because it shows how complex all of this is when we're thinking through these. And it's not easy. You can't just be like, I'm doing this study and you do a study. No, you have to think through every little aspect of this and say, you know what? Maybe this isn't the best design for this. Maybe we need to do this a different way. Or yes, let's measure delay in diagnosis, but then you have to decide exactly what is delay in diagnosis. And then there must be some medical evidence for kind of a point at which you need to seek treatment to get better. And if you wait past then, it could be worse, right? I imagine there's something.
Because of for this study, why we interesting for this study? Because nowadays the dengue fever is more increased in Lao every year, and more likely to develop to the severe this case than the normal case. So and the number of cases also increased. So can we look for the case study?
Yes, so that, and so you're interested in multiple exposures, right?
Yes.
So we could, and I know I pushed you into one exposure to get a research question. But we can measure multiple exposures. So you could start with the people who have the severe dengue, and whatever your control is going to be. And then my recommendation would be to match those people on a certain set of characteristics and then measure.
When matching A or say
Yes, it'll depend on what's important in the study, but anything that you don't want to look at as an exposure that you want to be the same in your cases and controls. And then you can measure the other factors that you're interested in. I think that the important part of defining kind of what the question is in order to properly define who your controls are for your cases. But if you, even if you want to have varying levels of dengue, people who've had dengue is your controls, but not specify kind of, not severe, but anything up to that. Maybe you'll match on, for instance, people who've had dengue before, right? Because that's a big component of getting a more severe outcome, is that right?
Yeah.
It's like one of the few things I actually know about dengue, but that would be a great match. So you want to make sure that everyone in your controls has had dengue previously, right? If all of your severe cases have also had it. Do you assume that the severe cases will have had it previously?
yeah.
And even if not, you can match your controls. So, okay, sorry, it's getting complex, but this is great. This is how you think through a study, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you have, I'm just gonna do this as though these are like ID numbers of cases and controls, okay? And we'll, we'll do it this way. And then our controls are just the same. I'm just doing the plus and minus as the like, oops, which would make any count. It's cases and control. So let's say all of these have severe dengue. All your controls have dengue, but not severe, right? However, that ends up being defined exactly. Maybe person number one has had previous dengue, then you can match them with a control who didn't get severe dengue, but previously has had dengue, okay? And then that way, if there are some of your cases with severe dengue who haven't had it previously, you can match that in your controls as well. 1-to-1 match, right? If we do that 1-to-1 matching in the design and in your recruitment, what do we have to do then in analysis? Yes, we have to match, we have to do matched analysis.
Because the previous dengue, there are many types. Dengue, 4 types, for example.
Okay.
Match with the type as well.
Sure, yes, I mean, if that's, the idea is to make as many things the same between your cases and controls that you already know are contributing factors to severe dengue, so that you can then look at the other factors that haven't been studied well yet, right? Like maybe this distance, you know, maybe this is no longer relevant, but maybe it is still, or other socioeconomic factors, or choice in delay. The more you can match, the better in your cases and controls. So absolutely, yes, match on type. You know, match on age and gender if you can. All of those things that are not changeable really, and may contribute to severe disease. So that would work, yes.
Yeah, for the matching, because dengue is also have 4 types,
Mhm.
and there are also literature that the person who got second time with different type within 6 months,
Mhm.
you have dengue hemorrhage, dengue. So in this case, we also need to consider that factor as well or not?
Yes, if that, anything that you know contributes to severe dengue, try to match on that. Anything that's established as contributing to severe dengue, match on that, because you want to get rid of the effects of anything you already know. Why would we do this study if we already know what causes severe outcomes? We're looking for the things we don't know, right? So anything we already know, we should match on. It gets complex, but there's probably enough people who've had dengue here that you could find the controls to match the cases, right? It's likely.
In this case, we have to compare one by one.
You match them
Match.
in your in the design, then you match them in the analysis. So you can match by, like, this person had type 1, type 2. I'm making this up, but you know, type 1 first and then type 2 second. So anything that you can do to match these. And what that does, what is this doing? What are we controlling for? Confounding, right? We don't want to confound our results and our hypothesis and our study question with all of the stuff we already know about dengue. about what causes severe dengue. We don't need to know that again. We already know. So let's control for that, control for as much as we can that we know can affect that outcome, and then measure the things that we don't know about yet. Does that make sense? Did
It's more clear for me.
what's that?
It's more clear because
Good.
we plan to do this study,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, how can we define the case and control? It's also, we also think about the match area, the
Matching area. Yeah,
Living.
that's a great idea. Yeah. Yes. That's good. This is great. I mean, this is the kind of, and I'll tell you what, we don't do research in a silo, right? We're very rarely sitting around doing research by ourselves. I love, one of my favorite things is sitting in a room with other researchers and talking these things out. This is how you write study proposals. This is how you come up with plans and you collaborate and work together. Or even if you're not going to collaborate on it, you just help each other, right? The first 2 years of my first professorship at the University of Kentucky, I was a part of a scholar program that brought together people studying women's health. It was funded by the government. And we met every week for a couple of hours, and we would talk about each of our different research ideas and study plans. And we would share drafts of our study proposals that we wrote. We would talk through them. We would raise questions with one another. We would help each other make our proposals better. And we worked in very different areas, very different, but there are certain things that are the same across research. So your methods and some of the analyses that'll be appropriate, how to treat participants ethically, what your question should be, all of these are great to discuss among colleagues. Yeah. Because it's not, you can't be expected to remember all of the stuff by yourself. And you don't know all, you may not know all the different factors that go into it, right? I couldn't write a study on dengue. I don't know anything about, I know like 2 things about dengue, right? So you have to get together with other people and create these together. This is good. This was a good walkthrough, yes? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because we looking for the extent, for matching the case, the case and control should be the same image or the speak about.
Well, so we were just talking about that, how they were saying that they're thinking of matching people within like a province or area, right? So
What can be framed this or
yes, I mean, it depends on what exactly you're going to be looking. So we ended up kind of scratching the distance as our primary exposure maybe. But so if you're looking for that travel time, you may even have matching, you may create a map with expected travel time, maybe like concentric circles, where you have, your hospital here, and then that travel time here takes this long, and it may not look, it might look like this. Maybe it's easier to get here, and then travel time is longer in this area. right? So you may, and then you may match people within this, but if you want to, yeah, so you may match your cases and controls, but you actually, if you want to look at the effect of the travel time, then you're not going to match on it beforehand.
And in this case, the transportation to transfer, can take the most probably be compounding factor or not, or
The type of transportation.
yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that might go into how you measure travel time, right? Travel time might not just be the amount of time it takes to drive on a road there. It may include all of these components, right? So that's something you have to decide.
If this were, if you, the transportation time you define as the factor that affect on the compounding. For example, maybe another thing is the same, but one person go by car, one person go by motorbike.
So that's a factor you want to understand and measure, right? So don't match on it if you want to know the effect. Right? Don't match on the things you want to know the effect of. But for when their example was people in the same province, you know that maybe it's about the same. It may be about the same distance, but you want to know more subtly what are those factors that affect the time it takes to get there. You can match on the in province, right? You really have to think these questions through carefully and how they're going to impact your study outcome. So I'm going to write just like a match on factors you already know to be associated with the disease, right? Do not match on factors you want to explore or understand. Does that make sense? Unless you're trying to drill down really small, like, so unless you want to keep province the same so that you can see what are the very subtle things within that province that are affecting people's time. Okay. How do we feel about this? Is this helpful? Does this help make case control studies a bit more? No. I'm seeing some faces.
I saw my friend, the MBS student, once is like a TB, but TB lost, how to say, TB resistant. Yes, the one, but unmet. But for one other student, they did like a low birth weight, outcome. So she do the matching.
She did matching, yeah.
But I so before and I mentioned about this, but my thinking about if the case is a rare case, small cases, but we met a lot, something like that, maybe you didn't found like
Mm,
you're thinking about 2 or 3 factor or exposure, but sometimes it's only one.
yes. So that is something you can do. You can match multiple controls to a case based on different factors, but this is getting complicated, right? But you can do that. You also don't have to do the matching. You can control in your analyses, but this is going to make a better study.
Yes.
This is going to make a much better study. Because what do confounders create in our studies? What are we always trying to avoid to have high internal validity? Somebody did a teaching demo on it yesterday too.
Bias.
Bias, yes. When we control, when we match our cases and controls, we're reducing bias. We're reducing the opportunity for bias. The more we can reduce bias in planning, the more rigorous and valid our data are, and the less work we have to do to control for bias in analyses. And you can't control for all bias in analyses. You have to do the work of controlling for bias in planning. It will make everything better. It will make your research better. It will make your science better. So, yes, go ahead.
So, meaning that mostly that we have to match the factor that we, what shows about that factor is likely to be the, is more to be the confounder or more to be the bias, right? That should be used for the match
Yeah,
factor.
yes, both, because the things we already know are related to the disease outcome, but that we're not trying to measure, confound our study and introduce bias. So they are both relationships we're already aware of and confounders in this study, right? Because if you are not studying that established relationship that you know about, then that relationship can be a confounder in your study, right? So like you're interested in something entirely different as an exposure or a predictor of an outcome, but you already know, we know a lot about disease and what causes disease. So anything we already know is essentially going to bias the results of your study if you're not taking it into consideration in some way, right?
In this case, for example, in this case that we know for the severe cases of the dengue fever, it might happen when the dengue is infected with the students or with the elderly, right? So if we want to match, for example, this one that the one of the factors previous dengue, it could be another cause for the severe dengue state as well, and another factors that could be severe could contribute to severe dengue state as well. So when we try to match, for example, that we use the previous dengue diagnosis, this one the one factors that might be cause for the bias of the confounding.
Yes.
at the stage of the analysis and something that should be matched on or that we consider for the bias factors or match only one or two.
As many as you can, that's reasonable.
Yeah, but
And then
it can be like some conventions.
Yeah.
Be matched too much.
yes, well, so what we were talking about, I think, was like, you can match a case to multiple controls if you want, but you can also, because there are so many people who have had dengue, right? That you could potentially find a one-to-one match with a case and a control who've had the same previous exposures and those kinds of things. If you can't, then you collect that information from everyone and then you control for it in the analyses. But for as many factors as you can match ahead of time. It's hard. You're not always going to be able to match everything. You do your best. But whatever you choose to match on in your cases and controls, you have to do for everyone, right? So maybe you're able to match on previously having dengue and type of dengue, but you can't, there's not enough people, there's not enough commonality between people to match on anything else. That's okay, you match on those. And then the other factors you measure and you include those in your analysis. So the regression example that Nalupa had yesterday, and you saw this long list of adjusted for age, gender, I don't even know what all of them were, but those are all because you know that this outcome is associated with age or with gender or with these other things you're controlling for. And if you want to take away the effects of those things on your outcome because you are really trying to focus on other exposures that you don't know about yet, you control for all of those. You adjust your analyses, you match as best you can, so that what comes through is the effect of these other factors you're measuring that you're interested in and their relationship with the outcome.
What I think about the potentials of bias and the bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that we have the potentials of bias, for example, like TB or tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
We might consider about the potentials of bias that, for example, the deficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not some commonly that is need when they do the test controls or when they conduct the research, they try to match only 8 or 6 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not be the 8 and 6 might not be the potential bias, but it can cause bias sometimes.
Yeah. So right. It's I guess the way of looking at it is it may not seem like it causes bias, but it could bias your study if you don't want to see the effect of those factors on your relationship that you're studying. Does that, so something like having a particular nutrient deficiency, maybe, could that affect the severe dengue outcome? Like if people had some particular kind of nutrient deficiency or. So you can also exclude people from your study if they have certain things that may determine that their outcomes are going to be very different than most people's. Right? So you were mentioning something about nutrition and tuberculosis, right? So you might exclude people who are I don't know, have like currently being treated for something that could affect their tuberculosis outcomes. Maybe they have pneumonia right now. Then you don't want people who have that, anything that's gonna maybe contribute to making the outcome worse. But that you don't want to, you're not trying to measure that in your relationships. You're trying to find these other relationships. So you wanna take the effect of that out.
Summarizing is that something that we don't want to measure for the outcome that we can use that one to be a match factor. But if we interested to measure or to explore.
Yes, thank you. That's a good summary. So Rod said that something that you don't want to measure in your relationship, you can use as a matched factor. But if it's something you do want to measure, you don't include it. It's part of your study, which is essentially like kind of what this. So I said match on factors you already know to be associated with the disease. And you're going to know. So if you don't want to measure it, you probably already have an idea about how it's related, right? You're like, I don't want this to mess up my study because I'm not interested in this relationship, but I know this affects the disease. So know to be associated with the disease, and you can say like, and, or you don't want to affect the A kind of effect. You don't want to change your study. And so in an argument I make often when people are doing studies that might be a little more exploratory or descriptive, so you're trying to understand factors that are affecting an outcome, but you may not know exactly what they may be. Often people will control for things like level of poverty or level of education, or maybe here like ethnicity, or in the United States, race and ethnicity. And that's okay if you're not looking at the effects of those on your relationship. In the work that I do, those are often some of the main determinants of the outcomes. So I don't want to control for them. I want to include them as factors because I'm looking at sometimes how they act as mediators, how they might be in between kind of a causal pathway of a relationship that I'm looking at. So there's a danger of sometimes maybe controlling for too much in that you're going to miss some of the real effects. But if you're thoughtful about how you plan your study, you won't miss those things, or you can kind of measure them separately. I wouldn't match on those kinds of socio-demographic characteristics. You can measure and control in the analyses maybe, but I wouldn't match on those. It's more the immutable or unchangeable, some of the unchangeable factors. If they've previously had these kinds of exposures, or if they have certain types of deficiencies or chronic diseases or something going into it. I am always happy to talk about this with you all too. You know, if you ever want to send me an email or you know, do a quick do a Google chat or something to kind of talk through some of these things. I'm happy to help with that. And also, this is where so if you ask me about the analyses for all of this, I'd be like, call Roger, call Nalupa. So I don't have a lot of experience with matched analysis, so I would bring in somebody who knows more than me. And that's also really important, is to bring in the right experts to help you plan your study long before you ever start collecting any data. You have a conversation with a biostatistician about, okay, here's my plan for matching and for collecting these data. Can you help me with a power calculation, with understanding the analysis that needs to be done for this? You can fall into a trap. I myself am guilty of this, where I really like to do my own analyses because I find it to be one of the fun parts of research. And when you're in academic research, you often don't get to do the fun parts. You end up stuck with a lot of the administrative. So much time is spent on things that aren't related to research that I hold on to the analyses because I love doing it. But sometimes I'm in over my head with an analysis I don't really know very well or understand. And then I have to reach out and get help. Other people in faculty positions will often never do their own analyses. We have statistics consulting centers who you include on your grants, and they do all of the analyses for you, which is very cool. And there's money in the grants to pay them to do that. I don't do it just because I like to do the analyses, but it would make my life a lot easier if I would use, and part of it too is that the type of analysis I tend to do, my methods and analysis, there just aren't that many people who do it. So I have now become the person in our biostatistics consulting center who is the expert on my method. So I can't get help from them, but I know other places I can get help when I need it. But so these are tools that you should use. Don't the term wing it. Don't just go, I'll just write something up and here's what we'll do, because you're wasting your time, your participants' time, the resources of whomever is giving you the money, but also your own time and resources. So yeah, ask for help, especially on analyses, because you don't have to be the expert in everything. There we go, having gone through another, let's see. Now, I think that we can walk more. Oh, no, hold on. I'll turn that off. That's my, I have to turn off all the, oh, that's terrible. Can't listen to it. So because we've already talked about cohort studies, you have a lot of this information on RCTs and experiments. Because why? What is an experiment underneath? So it's changing something, it's an intervention or a change, but the underlying study design is what? It's a cohort, it's still a cohort study. Experiments, randomized trials are still a cohort study underneath. You just make them an experiment by changing something. So just keeping in mind that a lot of the measures that we do and some of the approaches are similar because it's still, you start with people without the outcome, right? And you follow them to see who develops the outcome, but you're also adding some kind of treatment or intervention, right? So it's still underneath a cohort study. All right, so when we're talking about, and I know that's not reflected here in this study design, but just know that in your head as you're trying to think about any of the, biases and things that apply to your cohort studies, there'll be some form of that in your randomized controlled trials or your experiments as well. So the difference that you ask yourself, so we've gone through, do we know the distribution patterns of disease? We have a hypothesis. We're ready to test associations. Yes. The next question is, will the researcher assign the exposure to the participants? If your answer is yes, you're going to do an experiment. Anytime the researcher assigns exposure, it's an experiment of some sort, experiment or intervention. An intervention trial is an experiment, right? So the main key thing, experimental studies manipulate the exposure, right? The researcher is providing the exposure, whether it's an intervention or a treatment or something else. Someone just give me an example of any kind of experiment or intervention trial they know about or are familiar with. Anybody can think of an experiment off the top of their heads that they're familiar with or have read?
So we have like a Lao and we give
Supplements?
supplement to sugar under 2, 6 to under 2.
6 to under 2, and then you follow them
Yes.
to see their outcomes. What's the main outcome?
The main outcome is if the supplement will improve the
Gut health. So you're measuring their microbiome, their gut biome.
yes, microbiome.
So is it a change in the microbiome that you measure? Did you measure it at baseline?
It's like divide. So we give all the children and then we measure before and after.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because
Do you have a control group? No control. So that is more of a quasi experiment. Okay, that's a good example of a quasi experiment.
But
And
for us,
another shape is RCT. We give you have control and you control. They will be before intervention, village and intervention. Intervention we provide is the health education and some key message.
Okay, an intervention trial of education and messaging. Okay. And does anyone here do any kind of clinical trial of trying out a treatment in more of a clinical setting? I mean, I think most people here will probably end up doing intervention trials, right?
Thường nói thang lịch như hậu ơn là clinical trial rồi.
ท่าน
เอาท่านเล็กแต่ให้ละเอาท่านเล็กแต่ให้ละตอนไม่ได้เป็นการทำตัวที่คือ
ฉันมันเป็นการสังขารว่าคุณเป็นผู้ที่เป็นแต่ละว้าวนะอันคุณบัวสายก็เลย
เป็นอินทิวชั่นพวกนั้นคิด
but I heard from last coaching they did like placebo and non-pass and
Placebo and a drug. Mhm.
ลาวซี่ไปเดี๋ยวดู
ตัวนั้นผมไม่มีคนที่สอนการรักษา
I think those Lao control us will be quite like deep to supplement. First one is microbiome and another one is this micronutrient immunity by
they combine
by double by.
Okay. Wait, so one's a placebo or one's a different
no
treatment?
Different
Different treatment. Okay.
and they
So they're comparing groups,
yes
but there may not necessarily be a control who gets nothing, but there's two groups that they're comparing. Okay. Oh, yes,
I think I mostly like share the intervention.
yes.
The one project that I removed for the interventions for the that's the concentrations or gluten communicable disease. In the as in the 2015 that they have the interventions for the management of the NPD. The baseline and they do the survey. The survey for the two policies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And after that, they decide to do the intervention. Like for the interventions, they give the teaching 2 times a week. And for the outcome, I'm not sure for the outcome because at that time that I'm not the researcher.
yeah,
That's the outcome that they check for the cholesterol and the glucose level
mm-hmm,
and the measures of the physical strength as well,
Ah.
like the muscles on
yeah,
and they have the 2 villages for the case the intervention group
mm-hmm,
and 2 villages for the control group.
okay,
And the finals of the outcome that they can see is how effective of the interventions for the intervention group. They
Mhm.
quite have the dietary behavior is quite improved and the levels of the glucose and the cholesterol
yeah,
as well for the BMI as well.
that's great.
Yeah, and compared to the control group, that's not change.
Didn't have the change, yeah. So it's 2 villages that get the intervention, 2 control villages, they're measuring the glucose, cholesterol, BMI, and the intervention, and strength, muscle strength. And the intervention is 2 times a week teaching,
2 times per week, and they do the 8 week.
8 weeks,
Yeah.
twice a week for the whole village? Or is it in school
Not
or?
village, because that first line, they do the survey and they correct only the risk people.
People at
Like
risk.
they have the high BMI or they have the high blood pressures.
Mhm.
And they have the glucose.
Mhm.
And those people then come, they enroll for the intervention.
Yeah,
And they keep the residents and teaching them to know about the how to be healthy diet.
mhm,
Also, they give the exercise as well.
yes,
At the end of the class, every time that they give you 30 minutes or 45 minutes for the exercise.
mhm,
That's the design by the sport, like the sport.
the spot,
And the professional of the sports, the sport,
spot,
yeah.
got it, okay. And how long, so it was 8 weeks of intervention, and are the measures at baseline
And
and,
baseline, they do the baseline in the 2015, but they design and they decide to do the interventions in late of the 2000 or early of 2016.
Mhm.
I think, something.
and then when did they measure the follow-up?
The follow-up that I'm not, I think that they do the only the so the baseline and the line. I'm not sure about that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because in terms of I know the resources and the time to actually
yeah,
the detail, but just remember the whole details of the intervention.
so that's interesting too. And I think, so community-based interventions are often really good ways of delivering interventions because there's this sort of collectiveness around them, and you're usually changing something at a community level that's helping the individuals change their behavior, right? But then you wonder, well, did they keep doing classes? Did they keep doing
And that's effective program because the languages they keep doing until now.
so there's a village, and did the village take it on themselves to
Yeah.
continue doing it?
Yes.
That's amazing. So that's when you see real change happen, when you empower, you help provide the structure and the skills to the community and then empower them to take it on themselves to do. That's when you'll see long lasting change. Because for one, it's next to impossible to change individual behavior. You know, individual behavior change is really hard. It never works with just like, let's give them some information. It doesn't work. You have to change people's environments. You have to change their context, and you have to make the healthy option of something be the default option. You have to make it easy for people. But you also, if you tap in to that social capital or that kind of collectivism, that's a really effective way. Those types of experiments, those interventions are not delivering individual level behavior change. They're delivering community change. And when you measure those results, also, you can't measure at the individual level, right? Like, you'll take the measurements at the individual level, but you have to talk about it as change on the community level because you provided the intervention on the community level, right? But that's the kind of change that works. And I think we don't necessarily do that as much. We keep trying to just tell people to do things different, and it never works because people have way more competing values and priorities. But when you can engage groups and communities and that's a network. It's like the social network of the community to come together. You change what's transmitted at that community level, and that affects the individuals. So that's, yeah, thank you. That's a good example. You don't always see that kind of success too.
And this is the learning from this project, kind of like compared to the latest of the interventions. The other is that their leader is like not purely or not active to take action.
Yeah.
To be a leader.
Yes.
To try, but for the leaders that they have the good leaders, like
Yeah.
The head of the village. Yes, both of them, they have the power to control their village, right?
Yeah.
But it difference in terms of their visualize and the encouraging of
Yes.
changings of their community.
Yeah.
So that's
So
why the effect or the outcome is different between two villages of intervention.
Yes. Yes. So knowing that the leadership had what we call buy-in. They had buy-in, they were interested, and they were encouraging the village to do it. And those are things you can measure before you choose. You know, to an extent, you can measure those things before you choose villages for an intervention or for a community level intervention. We do a lot of community-based intervention in the United States in places like churches, for churches that have a strong influence in their community and are invested in the health of their community. The barber shops and beauty salons is another place, because when women go to the beauty salon or men go to the barber shop, there's a lot of gossip, right? A lot of talking. And so, you know, we had a study when the HPV, the human papillomavirus vaccine, first came out. We worked with women who were training to be beauticians, and we gave them a training and education on the HPV vaccine, and then they were able to have conversations with the women who came to see them in the beauty parlor about getting the HPV vaccine. So using those community ties as a vehicle for intervention and change is really smart. Yeah, so taking that kind of collective action is good. And when we also had the one study, and when I eventually kind of talk more about behavior change, I'll show you an example of this, but we had these sort of kiosks. This is before people had all of their smartphones and tablet computers, but you could interact with it and answer some questions, and it would print out a magazine for you that had like entertainment information, but also information about your risk for breast cancer and the list of 3 places you could call for a free mammogram. And we put them in a bunch of different places. We put them in churches, we put them in libraries, we put them in laundromats, we put them in community centers. And what we found is that in laundromats, people interacted with them the most, and we were reaching people who were most in need of the cancer screening, and also who lived, the people in the laundromats were closer to home. So why would that be? Do you have laundromats here? A place where you go and take your laundry that has washing machines and dryers, and you do your laundry yourself? Yeah?
Yeah, we have the laundry shop.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But do you stay and do your laundry, or does someone do your laundry for you?
And someone doing once.
So in the United States, you can go and you do your own laundry. So okay. So in the US, when people go to the laundromat, it's usually because they don't have their own washer and dryer. So even there, you're capturing people who may rent and not own a home. Or people in the United States, it's usually, you may have lower income if you don't have your own washer and dryer at home. And we have the dry cleaning, but we don't have the kind of laundry you take all your laundry and someone does it for you. So you go to the laundromat, you take all your laundry, and then you have to sit there and wait for the washer and the dryer. So you're there by yourself at the laundromat for a long time. So this kiosk, people were interested and used it because they're bored. They're sitting there waiting for their laundry and they don't have anything else to do. But also you don't want to walk very far to a laundromat because your laundry's heavy. So they captured people who lived very close to home. So the referrals we could give them were close to home, and they were of lower income, which tended to mean that they were They were people who didn't have all of the healthcare that they needed. So laundromats ended up being the perfect place to put these kiosks. You know, people weren't interacting with them at church or at community centers because they're interacting with people when they were going to these other places. The laundromat was the real place where they were just sitting by themselves and had time to use this. I give that example as just a ways of thinking about community and places in a community where you reach people and where you can engage them. Okay, so now,
So can,
yes,
some people say, operational study, which one? Because I hear someone say, oh, I do the operational study.
observational,
No, operational.
operational.
Which one should be intervention?
I don't know what exactly is an
I don't know, because
operational.
they said, oh, for me, I do operational study. That means they do something, implement certain something, and then they go back to see the result.
Ah,
I
okay.
think intervention.
Yes, I think it's like an intervention, and we might call it like an implementation trial.
Trial.
Yes, so anytime you hear the word trial, that's an experiment. Or an intervention. So they're all different terms usually for an experimental study where somebody is assigned, where they're giving the exposure. So yes, I bet that that's and it could be an evaluation also. So something was implemented and then you went back to see if it worked. So yes, that's probably a trial or an intervention study. Yes. Why don't we go ahead and take the break, take the 15-minute break, and we'll come back and talk a little more and might maybe have, depending on what Nalip is doing, maybe she can talk about the research. We'll figure out exactly what we're discussing on the return, but please have a break. Reporting your study results and knowing that there was some misclassification and talking about how it's going to bias your results. So depending on where the misclassification occurred, you can demonstrate how that may affect your effect size and bias towards or away from the null. And although sometimes you can do both, so you can analyze it, you should always analyze it with the intent to treat, like with all of it, and then you could try, yeah, and just report it separately and say, so when we took out these misclassified individuals and reran the analysis, here were our results. But you have to report with them in and with the intent to treat.
And how much is it can be a failure of
A failure?
failure of classification?
Well, what do you mean? How much, like,
Like
so how much misclassification can the study tolerate? That's a really good question. And it depends on your sample size, the effect size you're looking for. So how much difference are you looking for in the groups? So it's hard to say. I mean, one way you can look at it is by doing multiple analyses and seeing how did this affect your study. So you can take them out. You can also try running an analysis where you properly classify them. But for the main results of the study, you have to report them as they are with the misclassification and the explanation that has happened.
In a transparent way of the data.
Yes, exactly. So transparency is really, really important. So, I mean, people are, got rice on my laptop, forgiving and understanding when you're just honest and tell the story, right?
Yeah.
So just don't try to hide anything like that. Don't try to scramble and make up for it. You report the data, the analysis with the intent to treat, and then you can report your alternative analyses where you've tried to tried to correct for it in different ways.
And then sometimes like, for selecting the case, as sometimes different doctors, different healthcare providers consider different in different way of diagnosis.
Oh, yes. So that is something that next time you have to have a standardized way that is used by all the doctors. So, but you can also include a variable that's the doctor that diagnosed them. So how many different doctors about?
Maybe 4 or 5.
Yeah, you could definitely include a variable in the analysis.
The provider one.
Mhm. Yep, yes, exactly. I would definitely do that. So anytime you have a different, like in this case, a provider's way of diagnosing may be different, include provider as a variable in the analysis. If you're collecting from different hospitals, and sometimes those hospitals do things differently, include hospital as a variable in your analysis. When you can, and hopefully you'll correct for this as data are being collected, but if you have interviewers collecting data, check and compare some of your results and the data that are collected by interviewer on your own. And if you start to see some differences, then, well, one, you need to retrain your interviewers and make sure everybody's collecting data the same way. But you can include interviewer as a variable as well, because sometimes we see interviewer effects where there's actually, I mean, there's a well-known kind of famous study in the United States. This guy wrote a book called Bowling Alone, and it was about the decline of the social circle of Americans. And it's true, there is a decline. But one of the main studies he based this on was called the General Social Survey. And it turned out when someone went back and looked at interviewer effects, and for certain periods of time, the General Social Survey is collected every year. But there was a period of time when these interviewer effects were so large that there wasn't the decline in social circles, social contacts that the study reported. It was actually like 1 or 2 interviewers who were just like, going through, who were not properly collecting data. They were not encouraging, they weren't taking the steps laid out in their protocol to prompt people to continue answering the questions. They just wanted to get through it. So it's really important to capture those measures, right? And then you always say, next time, we will, and these are lessons learned, and every manuscript includes your strengths and limitations. Yes. And you put these in there, and I think I am always personally, as a reviewer, impressed by what people will put into the limitations, and especially when they treat it as a lessons learned, when they not only say, well, we had misclassification, but they say misclassification was due to providers using different definitions of a diagnosis. And we recognize that for future studies, we need to implement an intensive training of the providers, or a systematic, whatever it is, providing the way in which you are going to change your limitations, mistakes, anything for the next time is great, because that shows you've thought about it. It shows you're taking responsibility, and that you've thought through how to change that next time. So I think that that's really important. Yeah.
Can you allow me for
Yes.
one question that is just inspired from one there was a clinical quasi-experimental in community to increase the vaccination rate of the hepatitis B birth dose in rural districts, and there are two areas. In the south, they do a quasi-experimental of the cold chain box supported by WHO, and in the north again, supported by WHO to do the cell phone credit of the phone given to the health volunteers, something like that. And they show both south and north part. The rate of vaccination rate in both those hepatitis B increases significantly by median by some side test and something. And in a conclusion, of course, it does change. The number does change, but we are not for sure. Can be multiple factors in affecting the increase of the rate. So one of my colleagues said that how can we be sure that it does, or what should be considered for more?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't know all that they measured or reported, but there are so many things, particularly when you're doing a community-based intervention, but even with individuals, there are so many factors that go into why people change or why they may develop an outcome or change a behavior, that it's nearly impossible to say it's because of what we did, right? Especially with community level interventions or behavioral kinds of interventions, unless you're measuring at many points in time the specific paths between the intervention components. So if they gave phones to health workers and did that, so you'd have to measure, all right, did giving these phones, whatever, I don't know exactly what it would be, lead to an increased conversations with community members first, and then did those conversations with community members somehow affect the community members' knowledge of vaccination? And then, I mean, I don't know all the steps in the intervention, and you can do that where you can measure, and that's a really good way of measuring intervention. It's the what's the word? There's like intermediate outcomes, and every intermediate outcome that you measure is more data on what worked, on what parts, because you can change parts of an intervention later too, to make it more effective, right? So maybe, and there's also, what is the, it's like path analysis. Nalupa, what's the term? Is that right? Path analysis when you're, yeah. Yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Yes. Structural equation modeling, where you can take all of these components and say, what was the effect? I'll just draw it out real quick, but say you have all of these things in a path to your outcome. And this is like your intervention, one aspect of the intervention. This is another, this is like a behavior that you're trying to change. And here's another behavior. And you believe that this behavior helps change this behavior, that then leads to change in the outcome. Okay, this is an example. And this intervention, you're planning to change this, and maybe you have another intervention component that actually acts directly on this. What you can end up doing is doing a set, if you measure each of these, you can do this structural equation modeling or path analysis. It has different terms. And you can say, you can measure, not say, but measure, okay, intervention component 1 increased behavior 1 by 50%. And then behavior 1 affected behavior 2, it actually somehow ended up decreasing it. We didn't want that to happen. But intervention component 2 had a big effect on behavior 2. And so our overall outcome was like this.
Sounds like theory of change.
What'd you say?
Sounds like theory of change.
Well, it is. It's measuring. So this is going to be your theory, right? And you're actually measuring which parts, this is your model for behavior change or model for intervention. And you're actually measuring which parts work and which parts don't. It's pretty awesome when you can do this. So few people actually do it. I think about it all the time, especially because what I study is like, okay, well, how does your, race affect the size of your, affect how diverse your social network is? Like, how many people in your network are just like you and have the same education and same age, or are they different? And how does that network diversity affect your access to new information and new resources? But it's all it's a path. It lies along a path of change. And so you can measure each of the components of that path. Yeah. So that'll give you more information. Otherwise, you have to do your experiments in a highly controlled lab situation to know whether, and you have to control as many outside factors as you can to know it is the cause of the effect, right? But this is a great way of understanding what parts of an intervention work. Yeah, those are good. That's a really good question. Yes, great question. Yes, thank you. And this is something hopefully, if we have an eventual kind of a behavior, more of an intervention focused or behavior module, we can talk more about this. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I love everybody's questions. You all are amazing. Okay, so randomized trial designs, I think we can kind of breeze through this a little bit. So will the researcher assign exposure to participants? If yes, it's an experiment. If no, it's observational. Are participants randomly allocated to exposure groups? If yes, this is kind of a loosey-goosey a bit, but if yes, it's a randomized controlled trial. If no, it's more of a quasi-experiment. So what's the difference between the researcher assigning exposure to participants and participants randomly allocated to exposure groups? What's the difference in those two steps?
We have one group and we did something with only one group and we follow for quasi-explanatory, but for randomized control, we have two groups. Is one we did some intervention, whatever each one is now that we follow. We have to measure the first and middle or the end, like Kimberly said, like RCT or random.
So what you described, I think, is the researcher assigning the exposure. So you're saying we're giving them an exposure. Yes. So that's this question. Yes, we're assigning exposure. So they are in an experiment. But what about this randomly allocated to exposure groups? So we're giving them the experiment, giving them the exposure, sorry. So that means it's an experiment. But then what do we mean by randomly allocated to exposure groups?
Only participate two groups, and then one participant can assign to placebo or intervention,
Mhm.
any supplement or intervention.
But how are we doing that assignment?
Usually when we do when that comes, we have the number, we will randomize the number already according to the order of coming for the information. For example, the first one could be placebo, but maybe according also the blind. of
Yeah,
the study.
so it might be blinded too, but
Yeah.
yes, but beforehand, you randomly assigned the treatment or control group to numbers,
Yes.
and the participants as they come in are given the number in order, but the assignment to group has already been randomized among those numbers.
Yes.
Okay, so that's, mhm,
The first one could be one group, the
Yep.
second could be second group, something like that.
yes, yeah, good. So that's one way of doing it. But the distinction being, yes, that you have randomly assigned them. You're not just saying like, well, let's have all of you guys go over here and you guys go. It's a random assignment done in a formal way, formal randomization. We often when I had was running the 3-arm intervention trial, we did block randomization because no matter what, we wanted to make sure that even if we never got all of the participants we wanted, that the number of participants in each group would be approximately equal. So we would have a block of, say, 20 participants. I don't remember what it was exactly. I think it was blocks of 20. And there, among the 20, we randomized to the treatment group. And we assigned participants to those as they came in. And then the next block of 20 is randomly assigned to the group so that you get about the same number as they come in, okay? So when you're recruiting, because we were recruiting thousands of people, you want to make sure you don't, because, hey, it's random. You could potentially randomly have a whole bunch of people in one group and not, I mean, technically it shouldn't be like that. But over time, when you're done, it'll be equal. But if you don't reach that final number and you stop at any point along the way, you may not have like an equally assigned groups. So block randomization helps with that. But I'm looking, Libby's making a face.
Oh.
No? Okay.
I think I was thinking like.
Oh, everybody uses 20?
Ignore the faces.
Okay.
Too much information.
All right.
A lot of false positive here.
All right, everybody uses 20 then. We probably use
There's so
20.
much to say about this.
Yeah. Although we had 3 groups, so it probably wasn't actually
Yeah,
20.
probably wasn't.
It was probably like, yeah, maybe it was 28 or 21, 21. Anyway, yes. So yeah, on our little ranking, experimental studies have the most internal validity when done correctly. We can do randomized trials at this individual level, right? Where we're randomly assigning individuals. You guys know this. Or we can do a community randomized trial where we're randomizing entire communities, right? You do know this, right? I mean, like you just said, I think everyone's most familiar with randomized trials because it's kind of the most, when you think of science and you think of experiments, you think of an experimental trial, right? So randomly assigning individuals to an exposure. This is a multivitamin powder or not received multivitamin powder, and then follow them to see if they have anemia or don't have anemia. and this example is randomizing whole communities. So like, each of you have given examples of having a community. You can select communities, but you can also then randomize them into their groups, treatment or control group, and then follow up. And then let's say we're like fluorinating the water or something with the water, and then looking at tooth loss or tooth decay. Do we measure tooth loss and tooth decay on the individual? Do we report it on an individual level if we've done a community level intervention?
Collective.
Collect, yes, exactly. So you're going to report like a change in the overall level of tooth decay for the community. You're going to collect all the data from the individuals, you may, but what you report is a community level outcome because you did a community level intervention. But now you're furrowing your brow again.
Oh,
Okay,
okay, good.
you are, it's true, open book. Okay, so when we look at it's just to include all of our study design trees, right? Yeah, eligible people who choose to participate are randomly assigned to an intervention or control group, and then you follow for the outcomes. So an RCT, a randomized control trial, is used to determine the effectiveness of a treatment, right? Then when we introduce it into a community, and it's introduced into a broader population and see if it actually works. So we do these experiments in a controlled environment to look for the effectiveness, right? And then when we release it into the larger population, what do we measure? Or what do we call that? It also starts with an E. I'm actually blanking on it. Like I literally can't think of it either.
You're talking about efficacy and effectiveness.
Thank you. Yes, efficacy. Efficacy and effectiveness. Wait, but did I give the right order?
I think this is.
Right, but
agents that are much more social behavioral and probably.
Their effectiveness, yeah, exactly. So often we think about, so if we're thinking about these kinds of, even the two examples I've shown you, the multivitamin powder to individuals or this community trial of fluoridation and tooth decay, those are both effectiveness, because your efficacy trials are actually to determine, in a lab, does the multivitamin powder affect blood anemia of someone, right? Like, so the efficacy is, does this work? And the effectiveness is, can we do this? Can we implement this on a bigger level? Does this work in a community, right? Basically. You'll just consider effectiveness for most of this work, unless you're doing some of the more biological, or you've developed a brand new kind of intervention or treatment, and you really do need to measure whether it will have any effect on an outcome.
So you mean,
Did I just?
The efficacy is in the level of trial and in control environment.
Yes, yes.
So the effectiveness looking at a larger scale.
Usually, yes. Usually, yes. That's how it works,
because
right?
sometimes I thought the efficacy is the sufficient effort into the process, and the effectiveness is how much it changed.
Okay.
Sometimes,
Say that again. That efficacy. What is the
sufficient effort in the process? Any company in intervention. So you have put it in and out Okay,
Yes. Is it sufficient? Is it sufficient enough to cause the change you want?
then, yeah.
Yes,
Effectiveness is something we see after
yes.
the intervention change. Something like that, how much it change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure because sometimes I think like that.
Yes, I think that that's accurate, right? I probably just introduced a level of confusion I didn't need to in talking about this, because most of what often we're doing these trials of effectiveness or tests of effectiveness, because we're working on a population level, right? So we do look at RCTs to determine these cause-effect associations, but I will still argue that it's the randomization is what gives you the ability to control for confounding. And why is that? Why does randomization help us control confounding? Actually, that's a great point, a qualitative. But there may be, maybe let's say you've done a little bit of qualitative work and you know what maybe some of the barriers are. And so you offer them as choices in a survey.
But not so sure distribution of.
Yeah, you don't know the distribution. You don't know where there are certain barriers, and maybe in one part of the country more than another. So maybe you have open-ended responses, which is very difficult, but you're very committed to understanding the richness
We need more participants.
of the, yes, more. Okay, so what would your research question be if this were a cross-sectional? Or what is your research question here?
What are the barriers behind
Okay, yes, so what are the barriers to accessing the supplements? Okay. That's definitely one of the questions, right? So first we need to know what the barriers are. And then it looks like we want to describe these barriers by how they're distributed in the population, right? Yeah. Okay. So, yes, I think your cross-sectional study, are you going to collect new data or use existing data? Yeah. Yes, because we don't know what these barriers are, right? It said that. We don't know what they are. So we need to ask them.
I need no data. I need a report from the mayor of this.
The mayor of the village. Okay, let's do one more and then we need to get lunch, or you can sit and like look at these for. Well, all right, we'll just do this really quickly. In eating fruits and vegetables and non-communicable diseases. So that's what we're looking at. You've already built a conceptual model. You looked at your literature review. You think there's differences in the relationship between eating fruits and vegetables and developing non-communicable diseases by socioeconomic factors. And specifically, you want to look at region of the country, level of education, gender, race, ethnicity. You think the national survey, this is a made-up national survey, provides data on the patterns of fruit and vegetable consumption, as well as non-communicable diseases. What might you?
Of course.
So again, what are some of the keywords that jump out?
We have data.
You have data, okay? So you're like, I think this data might exist. Okay.
We would like to see the associate because we know more about relationships.
We have data.
We have some specific factors that we're looking at, and we want to know how it differs by what?
บอกว่าตัดสินใจว่าดีไซน์เดี๋ยวที่บอกว่าเขาจัดคีย์เวิร์ดได้จากซีเนอร์ตัวนี้ก่อนโอเคเอาเฉลี่ย
These
don't have written clue but catch keyword from this first
do what? Say,
เปิดภาพเสร็จแล้วเสร็จแล้วก็ทำบ้านสิบโอกับสิบ
เนาะมีข้อมูลนั่นอันไหนก็ได้คือทำมีข้อมูลอะไรเอาเราต้องเรียน
ข้อมูลมัน
เจ้าอยากเจ้าสนใจในความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างการกินข้าวและหรือไม่กับการเปลี่ยนเนี่ยการของติดต่อนั้นเนาะแล้วก็นี่ข้อมูลของแห่งชาติมีละทั้งเรื่องการกินและการเรื่องการเก็บกินและติดต่อนั้นเนาะและนอกจากนั้นยังสนใจอีกว่ามีปัจจัยอื่นสามารถรวมได้บ่ในการมีความสัมพันธ์กับการเนี่ยนะติดต่อนั้นซึ่งมันก็มีข้อมูลอยู่ในแห่งชาติด้วยกันเนาะในข้อมูลเนาะและจะขึ้นหางานวิจัยแบบคำถามพวกจะเป็น
ถ้าสำหรับน้องนะคอเซ็กชันแนลตอนนี้ก็ได้แต่เราเบิ่งข้อมูล secondary data นะ
เอา
You can explain it in English.
you can use it
เอาเดี๋ยวผมจะเลยOkay, then for me, if you would like to see now, but we have secondary data already. Maybe we design like a cross-sectional study now, but we look at like a secondary data. Can't do much.
so a cross-sectional study using existing data,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah, I think that'd be fine because we're looking at patterns. Okay, we've got a break for lunch so that we have enough time for wrap up and Nilupa's presentation, but you can look through these on your own and discuss.
Yes, pretest.
What?
The pretest.
What? This isn't the pre-test and the post-test? What?
questions.
And you see the score is reduced.
I know. I know that you don't get. Teacher, 12:20. 12:20.
It's all around.
I didn't have it.
Yeah.
Okay, you're the boss. You are the when we start again. Or even now. I'm sorry. And there's enough of it.
cái việc đó hồ ở trong lớp cái đẻ này về môn lo nhiều đâu đó đó đây tất cả
phải hay anh tuần một gói kinh tế tại tất cả là sự phục vụ có anh em có trận cũng không biết là cứ xài cho
Is this Thai or Lao?
Hi,
It's Thai.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Ready? Right, these people. Let me get these people to come.
Yeah. You will send comment. I will calculate how many is now. Team ai không cần không gặp đâu team ai. Đi không đi ba.
ไม่ได้ลูกพี่
So it's nice to dive in.
We discussed about association between BMI and earning energy. I said that I have the high BMI, so I need more.
Exactly.
But she has a low BMI, so she wants to like gain.
Yes. We can be a little cohort study of ANRCB cohort. Do weight gain.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I think Dr. Raj, do you need some for you and for we? You got some? Okay. Okay, I think let's get started. So Dr. Jeremy has been like emailing and talking to us. I just want to say for those of you who know him, he's always saying hi. He's always so interested about what everyone is doing and who is coming, and he saw some chicken dance videos. And he was just very excited. So I've been thinking a lot and looking at how hard, you guys have been sharing about your research. and your experiences and all the work that you are trying to do. And I think personally, what I find is that you guys are doing a lot of work. Everyone is very busy. You collect lots of data, students. Time is a very difficult thing. And many of you said you're pressed for time and you have a lot of work. And I hope that one of the messages of this, workshop is that you're kind of observing, like at this point, all of you are doing research and you're doing a lot of work, you're generating a lot of data. And now the point now is to increase the quality of this work, right? How do we make it more rigorous? How do we increase the evidence that is generated for the amount of work that you put in? How do you increase your reputation and the reputation of your institutions, of Lao PDR, UHS, and ministry, and everywhere else? How do you increase that reputation of science that is happening in Lao, to have a broader reputation in the region, internationally? Like that's what we're trying to do. And the way to do that is to think about how we go now from quality, how we can increase just more than doing more and more work of like thinking about how we make it better quality, more rigorous, and then we start thinking about how we also disseminate, right? So that you get the recognition of the hard work that is happening. And these things are extremely hard because you have very limited time, you have a lot of work and a lot of responsibilities, and some things you can change, and some things are very difficult to change, right? You can think about in your own small way of, your own small work, like where you work with your students, you can change some things there, right? How you relate to your students, to your staff, but big change is more difficult. And so sometimes you have to live with these constraints, but you can think about ways that can help, right? And so I was thinking about this and it made me think of my different correspondence with Jerry. You can see all my email, there's kind of too many. Also, it's an embarrassing number of unread messages, so just ignore, please. but so for example, like we only have so much time here and we've been very busy. We had a conversation about applying for PhD, and I shared that with Jerry. And this is just our correspondence. So I wrote something, it was not very perfect, 1 page, I made my notes, you saw it, I think. And I think you got this too, so I shared with Jerry. I just said, what do you think? And then he comes back and he has track changes like this. And it was great. It was great because he has more experience than me. He said he has been in charge of, he spent 10 years of his career in charge of a graduate program. So he came back, so when he took my notes and he added some things, and I think you're sharing this also, right? But it's nice to see the process, right? I did something and he makes it better. He makes note of what he did compared to what I did, gives it back to me, I can improve. And that way it saves me time, right? Instead of just working, I use his experience and his knowledge, but also he doesn't have time. He said he has spent 10 years being graduate director. He never wrote something like this because he just didn't have, you don't have time for these things. But between us, we can make a little bit of progress, right? So thinking about that kind of collaboration for like little things, we're not doing a project, we're just doing a small thing where it never gets done. There was another one. This project has been going on for, I don't know how many years this project has been, before pandemic, right? This project started, Kelly. So several years of this project, and Professor Shively always wanted to write something about the lessons learned from this project. And I keep asking, like, can we write a paper about the lessons learned as what is useful, what is not useful, what we did well, what we did poorly, and then it would be nice to share this experience because this project is not that common, but other people are interested in the topic. And he always said, yes, it's on my agenda, it's on my agenda. And then, 3 months later, still on the agenda. And so, so then I said like, okay, well, I have some ideas, you have some ideas. So he sent something just yesterday, I guess. And here's a list. And he started making just some outline of ideas to write in a paper, right? What is the introduction? What is the conceptual framework? And then what's the start? So he started just writing, and he said like, okay, well, add to this. This is very brief, right? It's just like, you know, outline, bullet, 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 you know, kind of summarizing the activities, the challenges, da, 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 da. Yeah, 314 words, right? So it's really very little, but it's his first idea. And I can spend a short amount of time and just improve that and pass it to Kelly or Kate or whoever. And slowly we build up. So if we ever sit down and say, I'm going to write a paper, it's a big work. It takes time, right? And many times we never finish. So how can we make it easier to produce these kinds of things, right? This is one strategy. I mean, there are many strategies, but this is one strategy. Just write 300 words and send it to your colleague and said, please just add maybe 200 more words and then come back, right? If you keep doing that for like 1 or 2 months, you have a product, actually, right? 300 words, this is nothing. But if you do that every day, can you imagine the output you would have, right? So I think like if the old strategy of when you're, you know, I think like, I always think like when I'm still a student, so easy to write you know, like you're doing a class, you do assignment and you get it done. These things are much more difficult. You can't sit, and nobody has time to spend 4 hours, you know, writing and something. Like now we have to find out a way how we can get work done with 1 hour here, 25 minutes here, something like that, before you have to teach a class or your student is or your boss is asking you to come to a meeting. Like we don't have the same time that we had when we were even students. Like, so we have to find new ways of working, and nobody, you know, there's no easy answer for that either, right? But if we have some solution that works for, you know, me, like it may not work for we, but maybe it does. So just that kind of sharing, I think, is helpful, because ultimately, whether we have time or we don't have time, like I think we have to be productive. We are still trying to achieve these big goals, and we never have enough time. So just thinking of that. So related to that, let me share this. Yeah. Or actually, before I go, I don't know if anybody has any comment on that. Are these challenges you feel like you have also?
Feeling what?
Not enough time, having barriers to producing and kind of advancing and needing some strategy or solution to problems of how to be productive and effective in work.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
We can always be more productive. So let me summarize this part. So you guys so kindly did this little questionnaire. So I decided to just actually really look at it. So we did this thing. We had 18 people who did the note card. I can't remember what day we did it. 3 of them were on the online. And this was what you answered. So I just wanted to show you the result. So there's no names. I have no idea who is who and what is what. And this is what I found. So everybody is interested in research. This was kind of interesting. This is what your institution, your place of work. There's a high priority for research, of course. Your priority is almost the same, maybe a little bit less sometimes, but still very important, right? And then there is a lot of difference among you. And I don't know how you interpret this question. This is not very scientific, right? I didn't do a pilot test, you know, and I didn't look at my questionnaire design. Also, I only put it in English. So as a survey, it certainly could be better. But this is just a workshop. So anyway, I did it anyway. This is the amount of effort that people have. Most people are about half-time research versus other activities. And I think I wanted to ask, but I didn't know how to ask very well. But for me, sometimes in American institutions, there's a very clear kind of what's the percentage you should do teaching, what's the percentage you should do research. Other universities are kind of not clear. They want us to do 100% everything. So it's difficult, but there's a unspoken priority for research, but it's not a clear guideline. And what I find is when people, especially researchers like you, like us, there's a difference in the type of research activity, right? So even if you look at my time with research, the majority of my time is doing research works with students. So they're doing a thesis, you know, they're doing a project, I'm helping, or you might have, you know, even this project I have an important role, but like, you know, it's a bigger project and Dr. Jerry is in charge. And so I'm kind of helping to him to do some things. Sometimes you have a leadership role and sometimes you're just helping a different research project. Sometimes you have your own research. Sometimes you are just helping your students do their projects and finish their thesis and, you know, get their degree, those kinds of things. So this percent of time, if you can separate it from what is really like your like interests, the work that you get recognition for, the work that you can take to a conference and make a presentation, sometimes it's not this much, right? For me, like what happens is sometimes the students, I have many students, they need a lot of attention. And so the majority of my research time, so I have my time, I have my research time, and then I have my own work. But then this big piece of students or my boss, like, you know, the department, like that's also a big piece of time. The university, so on. So then this work, it gets limited. Do you have that kind of similar situation?
Because we also teacher and also the research, it does same like in the same that we have to advise our students.
Or your boss comes up with some new project and you know, you have to contribute, of course. So that becomes a challenge also. So some of these things have no solution. Some of these things you can find a solution. I think especially when you think of the time we spend with students, there can be some effective strategies, right? I find when my students do many different projects, it's very difficult for me because every project is different. If I'm more strategic and I try hard, but sometimes I don't succeed, but I try. If they have more similar projects or there's overlap, then maybe I can supervise more efficiently, right? I can save some time. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not possible, but when I can, you can find strategies, even with the constraints that you have, to kind of help, you know, bring, you know, use our time most effectively. Otherwise, what happens is you don't sleep, you don't see your family, you don't do basic health, you know, and personal needs, and it is okay. But after a time, you will get tired and you'll get less productive and you just get too tired to continue. Everybody is young, so you have energy, but after a while, it just gets tiring. So let me see what you had to say. So I know there are some very good qualitative researchers here. I am not a qualitative researcher, and this is a very preliminary, you know, it's a fake qualitative research. So apologies for my methodology, but I tried to take the things that you've said. And some of you had multiple items, so I tried to separate all the items and just see what the categories are. So that's what this is. So lots of you were talking about just you didn't feel that you had enough knowledge. There were two things, knowledge and also experience. Like maybe you are supporting, you know, in your institution, you are supporting research, but you never had your own project, for example. So maybe that's some experience you don't have. So this is just, I actually typed what everyone said. I typed and I tried to put categories. So this was one. So generally there were some things, some of these are knowledge, some of them are experience. Some of them I would almost say it's like confidence, like you can do, but you're not very sure, you know, so some support might be helpful if you're not feeling very sure. So some of this, yeah, so that was one thing. Then some of you were very specific. So this is kind of general. We don't feel like we know certain things. So in the specific category, you've mentioned lots of things, and this is really very helpful. So methodology, for everything from data collection and hypothesis, and even before data collection, the hypothesis and study design, to the data collection, to the analysis, even report writing, I think. Someone mentioned writing report, interpreting result, like the whole spectrum of research. You all mentioned that you wanted more knowledge, but this kind of information is helpful when we're trying to think about like what do you need, what do people want. Yeah, I didn't put in any order. I just put it together on the slide quickly. Then there was this issue of time. These were all different kind of things, and there's I think two kind of issues about time. Most is just general, not enough time. Some of you said things that are certain things are time consuming. For example, administrative work, which of course we have to do paperwork and things like that. And that's also takes time from your research activities. And then of course, English and handling English in general, that's a challenge. There's some implementation constraints. So this was interesting. I think a few of you mentioned different languages, not just English, but also when you work with different ethnic groups, that can be challenging if you can't communicate very well. Road condition, just not having enough budget to get the work done. I mean, this is something we all struggle with. So getting work done. Then there are things about the people that you're working with. So I appreciated this very much because some of you were talking about like, how do you build this good team? How do you manage the team very well to be effective? Those are all also helpful. And then sometimes you have, positive and negative challenges. Sometimes it's a challenge also working with bosses, right? And making sure that they are satisfied as well. So there are things about just kind of working in the workplace environment and the challenges that you have, which happens to all of us. And then there are a few other things, having good information on Lao, prioritizing research and all of these things, unexpected things that happen, things like that. So, thoughts? Now that you see what everyone is saying, we'll just go back here. What did you think about that? I'm curious.
Amazing.
Is what?
Amazing.
Why is it amazing?
It is fast. It's good example of cross-sectional.
Qualitative research, yeah, it's cross-sectional.
Actually.
Yeah, that's true, probably.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a descriptive study, isn't it? Is it? I guess so. My sampling is a bit questionable. It's more of it's very convenience. It's very purposive. It's a convenient sample, but there you go.
Perfectly representative population needs.
Yeah.
So it's a complete.
Yeah, in a way, this is maybe almost the population that we're interested in. It's not even a sample. We didn't get everybody. The time that we did it, some people had meeting or, so it was 18 people and I had data on. So not everybody, but everybody who did something, I made sure you saw the qualitative part was every comment I included. I assume you're not surprised. Are you surprised?
So it would be conclusion of the.
This is not a research. I didn't do informed consent or anything like that, but it is anonymous.
It's very nice you saw us like this because it's done for the researcher or some data collector here. Maybe they would like to include it then they study for it and they think about next time I will be. I know some limitation, but we try to do together. We know about, for example, the school, the math, or lovely, something really with joy to solve the challenge together and joy to be lovely together. When we saw that it's important to make difference for me. So for yourself.
Well, I noticed that, I mean, data collection appeared a lot and wanting to kind of improve confidence and skills in collecting data and managing a data collection team. And that's good for us to know too, because it can help, help us think about next steps in areas where you would really like to improve.
Have another training or just, one session or something like that.
Leadership training.
Mhm.
I think so too. Because sometimes when we do the data collection, when we do the research, it's not just the data collection, but it's the college in institute, and some people is higher age and more senior, working more long time, for example, and then how to explain that if it's the right thing that you can do, is obviously something like this.
I think that is a big challenge. I can tell you a story of some place that is not Purdue that I worked before. I won't say where it is or what, but like it was a very good research place. I was very lucky to have a job there. But I remember, and they had some of these, similar to what Kate was saying, these kind of big studies that have been going for many, like for many years, lots of resources, and to be part of that team, I was very lucky, right? And then what I found in that was like, because so many people work for so many years and very senior people, they had certain methods. Like if you have a research question, you must analyze like this. It must be like this. This is the way. And of course, they develop that with a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. So things are good, but sometimes you can always do things better. So when you come and sometimes they say like, why is it? Like, are you sure this is the right thing? And the answer is, well, we did this for the last 20 years. And how can we now on the 21st year write a paper that is contradicting the previous 20 years, and this was a very good research institution and, but still like we all have that kind of historical when there are people who, are more senior and they have a body of work and you try to do, it is hard to be open for improvement. I don't know if there's a good answer. One thing I realized when I left that and I became more senior, a little bit more senior myself in a different, now when I came to Purdue, for example, then I was a little bit more senior and I had the opportunity to think about what was good from that and what can be better and to think about how I conduct myself. So I can improve how I work with my students to not have that same issue, So I won't tell my student, yeah, but you're going to contradict me. But so that's something I can easily change, right? Even though it's difficult, it's very easy to say, to continue the same practice, to say, we only do this way, please do this way. To do something new takes more energy and more time. So change, it's hard. The easy way is to just continue the old ways, because you know very well how it works and you can just continue. But so changing those things, I think it took me a lot of thinking and time to think about how I would like to change and make better. And I can only really do that in my area of influence, which is, my students or maybe my colleagues. But I also learned when I came to Purdue, when I had new colleagues like Kate, Kate is IU, but close, or Dr. Jerry, or, like they also have different ways of doing things that I can actually take some of those methods and also improve from seeing that example. So, yeah. Other thought on the challenges and how to make the challenges better? Or what activities like this could do to help you? like, besides this kind of workshop and all the